Hello everybody, my name's Mr. Bright and I'm down in room 225. If you ever have any questions, if you don't understand something adequately, you're welcome to come see me in the mornings. I'm usually in my room and available. If I'm not available, Mr. Bashir is right next door. He's always available in the mornings as well to help any math student with any class. So please feel free to come by, ask questions if you need to. Our topic today is completing the square, so if everybody can just make sure they have the handout for today and pencil and maybe some scratch paper to take some notes on, and we are going to get started. The very first thing I want to do is review something that you've done many times but maybe haven't seen for a little bit. Let's just write it down, x squared minus 8x plus 16. And what I want to do is I want to factor this thing. Okay. Now, you maybe recall that we want two numbers that will multiply to give me a 16 and add to give me a negative 8. And typically when I teach this, I say take that 16 and factor it. All right, it factors into 1 times 16 and 2 times 8. 3 doesn't go into it. 4 times 4. 5 doesn't go, 6 doesn't go, 7 doesn't go, and I've already done 8. 8 was up here, so I'm done factoring. Now, I don't know whether these are positives or negatives, so I always put a little plus or minus in front of these things, right? Because I don't know, maybe they're positive, maybe they're negative. I know for sure they have to multiply to give me a positive 16, they have to add to give me a negative 8. Well, if they multiply to a positive number, they're either both positive or both negative. If they add to give me a negative 8, well, it must be that they're both negative because you can't add positive numbers and get a negative number. So indeed, it is the negative 4 and negative 4, right? Negative 4 and negative 4. If I add those two numbers together, I get negative 8. If I multiply them together, I get a positive 16. And so the way this factors is x minus 4 times x minus 4. Now, that's not actually the way we write that. I mean, we can, but we typically don't. What we typically do is write it like this, x minus 4 quantity squared, okay? And that's called a perfect square because it can be written like this. That's important because we're gonna have this happen a lot to us when we learn this subject matter. Before we start actually completing the square, let's just talk about a couple of things. First of all, this is just another topic in a long line of topics that address quadratics, okay? And quadratics are a huge topic in algebra. And I don't mean just Algebra 1, Algebra 2. I mean it is a big topic in trigonometry and math analysis and pre-calculus. It's a big topic in calculus. Quadratics is a really important topic. And what makes something a quadratic is that thing right there. When the largest exponent on a polynomial is a 2, you have yourself a quadratic. And we spend a lot of time working with these things and how to solve them and how to graph them and what they mean. Spend a lot of time with them, okay? And so this topic of quadratics, one of the topics that we learn is completing the square. So generally speaking with quadratics, it's important to remember this ax squared plus bx plus c. That's that standard form, right? So if I were going to use this as an example, there's no number here. That's what we're getting ready to do. But the a here would be, right, that a would be a 1, the b would be a 2, and then the c is actually what we're going to find today. But what's important to remember is that a, b, and c are always numbers. They are never x's, okay? A, b, and c are never x's. They're always just the number in front of the x's, okay? Now the formula that you're going to need today for completing the square is this. It is b over 2 quantity squared, all right? Being a little bit sloppy here, I used a lowercase b, but I mean that b right there. And so in this first question right here, well, let's slow down here. Let's take a look at our directions. Find the value that completes the square and then rewrite as a perfect square. Okay. So we're going to use this formula of b over 2 quantity squared. Well, our b is 2. Right? So our formula is going to be 2 over 2 quantity squared. Well, 2 over 2 quantity squared is what? 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. And so this becomes x squared plus 2x plus 1. All right. And now I want to factor this. So in this case, I need two numbers that will multiply to 1 and add to 2. This one's not too tricky. Hopefully you have already figured out that it is a plus 1 and a plus 1. So that becomes an x. That is an x. And like I said before, this is not how we ever write this. We always write this as x plus 1 quantity squared. All right? And that's all we do. That's all there is to it. All right? You take the b, that b right there, which was a 2, over 2, and square that number. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So I rewrite this whole thing, and I've just created this new number that I threw in there. That is my new c. Then I factor this, and I get this perfect square, and so I can rewrite it as x plus 1 quantity squared. All right, so now, if the sub would please pause the video for just a moment. I want you guys to do problem number 2 and rewrite your new answer. Okay, so our b was negative 12, and so our b over 2, negative 12 over 2 quantity squared. Now over here I just did that work, right? Negative 12 over 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared would be a positive 36, right? And in fact, anytime you square any number, positive or negative, you'll always get a positive answer. This will always be positive. You'll notice they put a plus sign there. That's because they know whatever number you come up with, it will be positive. All right, so now we've got this new trinomial, right? There are 3 terms there, so it's called a trinomial. It's got to be factored. When we factor it, we find it factors down to y minus 6 and y minus 6, right? If you add the negative 6 and negative 6, you get a negative 12. If you multiply them, you get a positive 36. And we can rewrite it as a perfect square. Since these are both y minus 6's, we just write it as y minus 6 quantity squared. Now, has anybody noticed that that was a negative 6 and this is a negative 6, and that back on problem number 1, we found that this was a plus 1 and this was a plus 1. And it turns out that will always work that way, that your number inside of your parentheses, the number inside of your parentheses will always be this b over 2. Whatever b over 2 is, that's going to be that number right there. You don't have to factor. The whole reason we do this, the whole reason we do completing the square is so that we get a perfect square, right? We don't have to factor. We know that's going to be b over 2, that's going to be b over 2, and so this will be b over 2. And so I can go straight from this statement down to that statement. All right, just do one last as a check. Go ahead and do problem number 3, please. Go all the way through to the end, and let's see how you did. Please pause the video. Okay, if you did it correctly, you should have gotten x plus 12 quantity squared. All right, 24 over 2 is 12. 12 squared is 144. We knew this would just be that b over 2, right? 24 divided by 2, which was that 12. Okay, now what we want to do is skip down to problem 13. Okay, this one is a little bit trickier. What is our b over 2 going to be? I'm just going to do this over here to the side a little bit. B over 2 in this case is going to be negative 1 over 2 Now this all gets squared, right? Now, how do we square a fraction? Well, first of all, we know that we have a negative times a negative, so we know that we're going to have a positive answer. And when you square a fraction, you square the top and you square the bottom. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, and so this becomes a 1/4. Okay? Our b over 2 was 1 over 2, negative 1 over 2. You square the top and square the bottom, you get a positive 1 squared over 2 squared, or a positive 1/4, and so that becomes a 1/4. And now I factor. But we know how the factoring is going to work, right? The factoring is going to be this thing. It's going to be b over 2. And so it's just y minus 1/2. And we're done. All right. So go ahead and move on to number 14. If you would please do number 14, let's pause the video for just a second and come back once you have finished number 14. All right, so if this went well, then that you had negative 9 over 2 squared become an 81 over 4. So this was the term that goes into this blank is the 81 over 4, but when we factor, we know that this number will be the b over 2. So the x minus 9 over 2 quantity squared. All right, that's all we have to do for today. So I want you to finish this worksheet and then please turn it in so we can give you a grade for it. All right, thanks a lot.